Welcome back to another episode of the Dr. Beau Show. Thank you guys for watching so far. Leave me some feedback. You can comment when I share this on social media. You can comment on YouTube. Let me know how you're liking these, what you want to hear. If you have questions, like I've always said, send me those questions. Ideal way to send those questions in is via video. Just record yourself on your phone saying your questions, and then I can put you in the show. I've had a couple of email me, DM me. It's just much easier to do it in video. If you do it that way, I'll try to get your question faster. Tip off, just got done with a run. There's a lot of gait coaching that really focuses on what part of your foot is hitting the ground. And we hear people say all the time, well, I've been told, or I transitioned to a forefoot landing or landing on the front of my foot, or even I'm trying to run more on my toes. Please don't do that. Incidents of injury with changing how you run, if you've accommodated to a certain way, what we actually want to see is a change of your foot in relation to your center of gravity, your center of mass. So think if we dropped a plumb line right down the middle of your body, we want to see your foot land as close to that middle or that center of gravity. Now it's always going to be a little bit forward, about 5 degrees off of body center is normal. But when we artificially try to get our foot into a position that it doesn't want to get into for all sorts of reasons, we're probably going to come around with a different injury, more injuries, or just more problems overall. So don't try to change your foot position, try to change your center of gravity. So what am I reading? So right now I'm rereading actually Dirty Jeans by Dr. Ben Lynch. If you haven't read this is a really good book that's aimed at the lay person, but it's a high enough level to give you a really good insight to genetics, epigenetics, and a bit of a way to maybe, or a different way to think about health and some of the things that are affecting us from a human societal level. Outside of that, Ben Lynch used to, I don't know if he still does it, used to do a thing called Strategene, where he would look at your genome, your raw data, kind of look at some SNPs and give you very, very detailed and intricate flow charts on how to go about possibly using supplementation, diet, and things to correct that. But if you read this book, the reason I like it is its approach is far more comprehensive. So he says that sometimes it gets a little too in the weeds to look at genetic reports, and then we try to treat those SNPs or those polymorphisms, where instead we should treat the bulk of what we know is going on. He has the dirty 8, these genes that we think are causing some of this stuff, and basically says you can do a lot of this through how we handle stress, how we eat, sleep, social aspect, exercise, all these things. Pretty good book, especially for the lay person, so check that out. Also, I'm reading a fiction novel called The Celestine Prophecy, so bear with me on this one. I'm probably 80%. I look at my Kindle, it tells you what percentage. I think I'm 90% done with this book. It's a pretty good book. It's following I believe he's a psychiatrist in the book, and it's basically about humans waking up, right? He's getting woke, and he finds this manuscript in Peru, or he doesn't find it. It's being kind of unfolded to him throughout the novel. It's an interesting book, but towards the end, I was a little disappointed because it's pretty good, right? It's just kind of talking about what humans need to do overall to be better people, but it gets to the end, and I guess I should expect this, talking about a utopian society and all, yeah, and even brings up Marxism a little bit. So it's kind of interesting. So check that one out, Celestine Prophecy. What I'm watching. So if you haven't listened to the Tim Ferriss podcast, which I guess will go in my what I'm listening to as well, Tim Ferriss podcast with Dr. Jane Goodall, you got to listen to it. From a health standpoint, I believe Jane Goodall is 86 years old. I may be wrong in that. And she was sharp as a tack, still just completely on it. And what was interesting about that, Tim obviously I call him Tim like I know him. Tim Ferriss dug into her a little bit on, what do you do to stay healthy? What are some of your routines? And she's like, I don't really care for food. I don't eat that much. And what she meant, I don't care for food, like she's not picky. She doesn't eat that much. She walks her dog every once in a while, and she works from like 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. almost every day. But what do we see is the main catalyst of maybe her longevity? And she talks about her family genetics and how it's a pretty strong profile. But it's passion. It's something, she has a purpose. And if you look at any of these long-term epidemiologic studies or blue zone studies or any of these studies that look at populations that were stand out healthy, yeah, they followed healthy practices, possibly being vegetarian, not drinking, things like that. But they also had a very strong purpose, because these communities were usually tied around a purpose. whether it was a Mormon society or a Seventh-day Adventist or whatever it is, it seemed like there was a purpose behind the health. And humans are purpose-driven creatures. We need something to look forward to drive us forward. Another book that I've read by Richard Louv talks about what is human work. We know a bee is supposed to go pollinate flowers and make honey. We know a bird eats worms, builds a nest, and has babies. But what do humans do? Well, it could be 1,000 things. That's why we have to kind of find our human work. It's a really good podcast, but she also has a documentary that came out, I believe, on the 22nd. So check that out. Really good stuff. And she also has a really cool social media following. Another documentary was Jacob. This was just, I gotta be honest, I was perusing Netflix. I found it. This is about Jacob Appel. I think he had 9 degrees, like 4 master's degree. He is a medical doctor and a lawyer. I think he went to Columbia Medical School and Harvard Law. But he's also a short story and fiction novelist. He's written numerous plays or Broadway productions. I think he had written 211 journal articles, like research, peer-reviewed journal articles. This guy is a genius, a polymath, obviously, can do just about anything. There's 2 things I really took away from this. One being that nowadays, in particular, we really get told that if you're going to be good at anything, you got to go all in on that thing. I've heard Gary Vaynerchuk say that. I've heard numerous people, read in numerous books, like, if you're going to be great at anything, you have to go all in on that thing. I don't think that's true. I think that you see a lot of people, now maybe a bandwidth thing and an intelligence thing, right? That people have a certain amount of bandwidth that allows them to do something that's different where they don't have to go all in. But where you see people that are really standouts in society and culture over the long term were people that were a bit of a polymath. And a polymath would be somebody that has an expertise or a very high knowledge level in multiple things. Because they were able to cross-pollinate, right? Just like those bees, they were able to bring ideas from different aspects of things, bring new perspectives, and then that was the crux of their innovation. So if you go into like the Renaissance era, think how many people were a scientist but also an artist, or compose music and mathematics in a certain way, but also applying that to art at the time. I think we have too much of this stay in your lane nowadays. The other thing I took away from this is in the middle of this documentary, they're going over how many articles he's had published, and I believe it was 211. But he said he had around 20,000 rejections. So this guy, it's kind of that overnight success thing. You look at the overnight success, and it's really an iceberg, right? It's built below the surface. All this work that was applied for years. And I really liked, had this kind of just mentality that, like, I'm just going to keep doing whatever I do. Like, I'll keep putting in stuff or whatever it is. Like, I'm just going to keep going. It doesn't matter. And his purpose, we just talked about, like, finding that human work, is just continually learning and wanting to be creative and create stories. But he's also trying to help people. He's a psychiatrist. That's what he did with his medical degree. And you'll see in many of his stories and how he applies his psychiatric practices very much from a narrative standpoint, right? And he was also very aware of not being too confirmed in that narrative when you're working with a patient in psychiatry realm, of not putting too much of yourself into it. But then he can do that in his creative work. So I think just like anybody that does anything particularly creative or artistic, there's a lot of self-fixing and unraveling self-loathing that occurs in those things, and I think he's found a unique way to do that. Really interesting. One that I watched was Fish People. This is a documentary by Patagonia that I believe looked at 5 different people that all drew their joy, their human work, their purpose, or their job from the ocean. And it looked at a surfer, it looked at a free diver, looked at a photographer, but really good just documentary. Patagonia's got that very artistic, creative look and feel to any of their films. So it's a really good film. Yeah, I just liked it. I don't have a great learning lesson from that. It's just a good little short. It's like 45 minutes. So take a look at that. What I'm listening to. So I told you I'm listening to that Tim Ferriss podcast with Dr. Jane Goodall, along with a lot of other podcasts. But I thought it was pretty cool. The other day I was scrolling. Could you stroll? Scrolling through Instagram. And I saw a new song by acquaintance that I went to high school with, Patrick Jenkins, and it's called Clear Northern Sky is the album. It has a little description of this song, and I'll let you guys listen to this real quick.
We'll make our bed, pull back the shade in the bright sun of the brand new day. We'll pick up our children, swing them around.
So why I like the song is, hey, I'm a big folk music, on the country aspect, kind of that Delta blues feel. So anything along that line, which he has a lot of his music, very Nick Drake kind of style. But also the description of this, he kind of pulled some inspiration from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but I thought it was a very apropos song for now. It's like we want to be doing for our youth, what to expect of our youth, and how the youth are going about getting these messages. So you can read his description, which describes it much better than I did, and listen to the song, which is really why I wanted to put it on there. And hope you guys like that. And he has a bunch of other great music, so check that out as well. Q&A is a different style Q&A, so I don't have a fancy video to show you, but this Q&A comes from actually two different input points. So I've done some virtual consults, and one of my virtual consults, it came out that this person is very detail oriented and is really tracking their progress, right? Looking at, they've had multiple complaints and kind of tracking stuff to the point that they created this massive spreadsheet, 4-page spreadsheet of daily exercises and what the pain was resulting from or getting better, what the progress was with the pain and how the exercises were going themselves. And then a lot of details sent to me in emails. So I had that going on in my mind. And then I did another virtual consult actually with a physical therapist. And in the beginning of this, it was our second visit, you could tell that there was a lot of talk of like, well, I'm doing this movement wrong, or I believe that this is taking over for that. And if we come at this from here, we have a professional, and then we have somebody that's very detail-oriented, wants to get better, wants to get out of pain. What we got to realize is, I've talked about earlier in the show about creating a challenge so a human can adapt, or finding human work. A big part of human work for millennia has been very physical. And the physicality of our humanness, right, of humanity, has made it such that pain was a good communication tool, because we were probably doing things that every once in a while pain alerted us that, man, something's really wrong, you got to stop, or you've gone beyond your limit. Nowadays we have a mismatch of environment and human, and that would kind of play into what I like to study now, which is called health ecology, which is basically the interaction between an organism and their environment. So we look at a human and their environment, and then pain is the mediator in there. And pain is a communication, right? And pain is actually a response to nociception. Nociception is the cellular signaling of noxious stimuli, saying that, hey, pain is our response to that. So pain isn't really at the knee, right? Pain is central. Nociception is at the knee. But what we see is that people sometimes get tied up in, I'm doing something wrong, or I've had a previous injury, or I've had trauma, or I've had something happen, and now all of a sudden the narrative gets skewed to where pain is tagged with something. We would call this a neurotag, right? That, oh my gosh, every time I garden, my back hurts. That may not be anything. It may have been a physical injury or just overuse injury to begin with, but now it may be more of this kind of neurotag where your nervous system is very adaptable and trying to get you to learn very fast. And it may just be saying, you know what, I associate gardening with back pain, and all of a sudden, anytime I garden or do something similar to that, I have back pain, when there may be no underlying pathology. A pretty big deal, because we're dealing with a ton of chronic pain in society nowadays. We see an opioid epidemic, right? We see people like me are getting inundated with cases of fibromyalgia and chronic pain syndrome and migraines and all these things that seem very hard to explain in a mechanical sense, which has spurred a lot of research into things like pain science and can we tie biomechanics to pain and how do we treat somebody in pain appropriately. But I always think that, this goes more to the lay people instead of people in my field, that it's not about pain sciencing everybody and making sure they understand this. It's actually just for us as a clinician and a physician, it's actually figuring out why we think they're in pain. Sometimes it's not giving them our explanation of how pain is understood. That may not help them. What we're supposed to do is use that information for ourselves to then apply it, just like you would apply a technique, an adjustment, a modality to your patient and say, well, let me think about all the things I know about pain and movement, and then apply that to this person. And I don't have to have a spiel, a pain science spiel, or a poster up on my wall talking about, well, this is how pain works, and your pain may be this, maybe some pathology. We're going to use movement to kind of reorganize or get your body to do something novel and new. No, we should be so adaptable in our approach because humans are so adaptable and so bio-individual. So that's just my 2 cents to clinicians out there, but also people that are experiencing pain, that pain isn't always tied to pathology. Maybe it's less tied to pathology than we really think it is altogether. But that doesn't mean that it's in your head. It also doesn't mean that it's always tied to some extraneous thing. It means that it's a conglomeration of all these things, probably with all pain. And that gets really tough to treat, but it is good to understand that. But for clinicians, make sure that you're having an adaptable approach to each patient and not having a, hey, this is the bio part of the biopsychosocial, this is the psycho, and this is the social. We separate those out, we explain everything, we find out which category. Nobody falls into any category. I hope everybody's found that out by now. So the main thing I wanted to talk about today is my new blog series. So this series overall is going to be called The Age of Movement. That is a dual meaning, right? I'm going to go from what this first article is that's coming out of in utero movement, both looking at what the mom's doing and what the baby's doing from a movement standpoint, and what's that mean? Why is that important? How does that benefit us as a human? But I'm going to go through every stage of life from 0 to 1 year old, 1 to 2, 2 to 5, 5 to 8, 8 to 12, 14 to 25, 25 to 45, 45 to 65, 65 to 85, 85 to 100. Going to go through all of those. There's going to be little snippets throughout there too on specialty times of our lives, like partum, postpartum, growth spurts, maybe even injury. But I'm going to go through all these things, and why I'm doing this is it always astonishes me that people with children don't understand, like, hey, what is normal for a kid? Because A, you don't have to think about that when you're a kid, right? You don't think about your own movement. You're just doing what you're doing. But B, we live in a very different world now than we did even 30 years ago when I was born, which creates a different demand for what we have to get our kids to do to have normal humans. So I wanted to do this as a bit of a roadmap, and I'm not saying this is the roadmap of human movement, right? That would be an encyclopedia. What this is kind of a broad strokes approach to, hey, this is what we see as commonalities throughout these times of life. These are developmental milestones that we see early in life. This is what we should be working on later in life from a movement standpoint. But I think this is very important because I get a lot of questions about this, both for people's children, but also we see people that do things because they enjoy them, right? From an exercise standpoint, like running or CrossFit or cycling. But we don't see that people want to change over time. Your body is always changing. So if we think that we're going to be the best version of a human by not changing anything over decades or over years or whatever it is, then we're mistaken. Right? We have to change to create change, and if we don't, we're not going to get that change that we want, and that could lead to injuries, poorer health, maybe not as long of an enjoyable life. I don't know. This first article is called Fetal Movement, the Beginning of the Movement Journey. So to think that movement starts in utero makes sense for anybody, any mom that has had a baby in their stomach moving what seems like constantly. But really I just try to break this down, and all I want to do today is read a little excerpt from this. I hope you guys explore this blog fully. It's on chirofarm.com under a blog section. If you subscribe to the newsletter, which I highly suggest you do, so you get all of the links and articles that I've talked about of what I'm listening to, what I'm watching, what I'm reading. And then also you can go check out this blog. So here is a small excerpt from Fetal Movement. These adaptive mutations are literally what made and continue to make us human. Our DNA is beckoning for us to move. Before we were born, the echoes of our need to move were being whispered to the cells of our ancestors. Just as the Lumi dance to their indigenous music and speak stories in their native tongue in order to pass on their culture, As humans, we must honor our ancestral DNA by moving and exercising in order to pass on our movement story, our human story. So that's just a small excerpt. I highly encourage you to read this. I hope that people find benefit and use this as a resource that helps kind of guide what they're doing, how they think about movement as it applies to their life, but also with their kids or people, friends of theirs, whatever it is. But I'm also going to turn this into a book. These blogs will be very short versions with full chapters, condensed, then I'm going to add to it. So hopefully by the end of the year, I've got most of this together, and maybe end of the year, beginning of next year, this can come out, and the Age of Movement will be on a shelf or on Amazon, so you can buy it and have your own little movement field guide. As always, I appreciate you guys watching. If you have questions, you can send them to me, DM at Dr. Beau Beard, or to my email, drbeaubeard@gmail.com. I hope something in here that you heard or are going to watch or are going to read makes you better than before.